Thanks very much, Mattu. Thanks very, very much. And I don't want to steal your lines, but I am also very excited about this panel. It's fantastic to see three friends who have been involved with journalism AI over the years. So it's great to say hello to you three again. It's also lovely because you're all in different places. The Journalism AI project is very much a global project. And it's wonderful that you're joining us from Stockholm and from the USA and from India to talk about AI. So I'm very grateful for those of you either staying late or getting up early. It's very nice to see you again. It's also wonderful because the three of you have a really interesting take on AI. You work with newsrooms, but you also have this other role of researching and developing AI for different purposes and so on. So I'm going to cut to the chase and get on and ask you some questions. We're going to find out what you personally have been up to in the last year, and then perhaps have a chat about the projects that you admire and where you think this technology is going with regard to the news media. And I'm going to start with the person who is relatively closest to us physically, and that's Agnes, who's in Stockholm, I assume, this afternoon. Agnes, what have you been up to this year?
Hi, Charlie, and hi, the rest of you. I am in Stockholm indeed. Great to join you. This past year, I would say if 2021 was about strategizing for AI, 2022 has definitely been about meeting needs or trying to meet needs in AI. And that goes both for internal stakeholders and the users that we want to serve. So internally, we've in the past year developed and launched an internal training program. We call it the AI Academy, where we have special curated trainings for our engineers, our product managers, and our business and product management staff, really trying to give them specific relevant tools on how to use AI in their roles. Personally, I've had a lot of fun training our engineers in risk assessments, working on topics like fairness, transparency, sustainability, specific to our models and the systems that we either build or use. So that's been a wonderful experience. More user-facing, we've had teams across Schibsted working on lots of exciting projects this past year. We've experimented with GPT-3 generated summaries, bringing them to Snapchat in our Norwegian market. We've created a synthetic clone of one of our podcasters, making audio, all of our news accessible in audio for a specific news brand. So lots of different experiments. Personally, my biggest experiment is setting up a new organization within Schibsted. So we've actually set up a new joint venture between Schibsted and our owner foundation, the Tinius Trust, called InLab, short for Inclusion Lab. And this, while not your traditional AI project, it really is an effort to try to tap into new audiences. We call them news outsiders, audiences who, for different reasons and in different ways, don't consume and trust editorial news media like ours. And we think that AI and other emerging technologies can help us tap into these communities. So we've set up a new organization dedicated to exploring that. So that's definitely been a big focus 2022.
Yeah, not busy at all, really. That's absolutely fantastic. We're going to come back and dig a little bit deeper in some of those ideas. Surya, come to you next, because you've had a bit of a shift, haven't you? You've had a bit of a change.
That's right. Thanks, Charlie. So I used to work as a data journalist at The Markup, which is a nonprofit newsroom based in New York City, working tech accountability. So my career has been basically working as an investigative data journalist. When I started doing that work, that wasn't even a job title that I knew you could have. So it's kind of been interesting to watch how this field has evolved. But in March, I made the decision. I basically kind of got to a place where I realized I had a better understanding of my process of how I go about. So like the real question I've been trying to grapple with for the last 6 or 8 years is, how do you do meaningful accountability stories around algorithmic systems and the influence on society, right? These the traditional anecdotal stories don't really work the same way for algorithmic systems because we're not all experiencing the same reality. So it's kind of in this it's been a big challenge. And one thing I've learned over the last year of working, the last 3 years that I worked at the markup was one kind of component that's really important to answering that question is being able to precisely capture data on the ground where people are interacting with the algorithmic systems. So that's kind of what I'm really leaning into now. So I've started a new lab at Princeton University called the Digital Witness Lab. It's part of the Center for Information Technology and Policy. I'll drop a link to it in the chat for anyone who wants to see it. But basically the idea, so the joke I kind of make is that we're sort of like a photojournalist in algorithm city. And our role is to witness what's happening in the algorithm and the role it plays in society. And the only way you can meaningfully do that is to capture on the ground what's happening. Because I think it's really important to capture the context of where the technology meets the people. Otherwise, it's kind of like looking at it in a silo. And that's, I think, one of the key roles journalism plays in this space is like bearing witness to what's actually happening on the ground. So that's what I've been up to. I basically pivoted from a newsroom into setting up this lab. And the idea of this lab is to actually collaborate with journalists and kind of bring the technical skills that I and my co-founder, Misha, have built over the years, doing this sort of work to a much broader range of journalists. Our first project is actually looking at WhatsApp. We're calling it WhatsApp Watch, and we're building the tools. Sorry if there's a siren in New York City. I think you all probably know how that goes. But yeah, so we're working on WhatsApp, and we're focusing more on the global south, collaborating with journalists in India and Brazil to basically get these data capture tools in their hands and then support on doing the analysis to pull out the stories from the data we gather in order to do some meaningful reporting. So that's kind of basically what I've been up to.
Just saying, congratulations on the new venture. It's going to be really exciting. I'll come back to that in more detail, perhaps in a second. Abhishek, you, as usual, have been very, very busy working with lots of different people, mainly with newsrooms, isn't it? How's your year been?
Oh, it's been fantastic. So last year when we were here, we spoke about how we need to cross the chasm entirely because AI in this part of the world is, well, an expensive proposition to talk about. So there's a big chasm in terms of both financial as well as in order for understanding. That's something that we have been working on this year. In HD Media, we have been working deeper with editors. So the way it goes and the conversation which I have with our editorial is that, we kind of make you into superhumans, and build an AI exoskeleton for you, which you'll get to do your boring work and get the system to do the boring work, where you focus on the interesting work, right? So we have been experimenting a lot. One big change that has happened is last year we were working with tools that were external, and things like translation, so we were kind of taking that tool on a subscription basis and trying it to use internally. Now we have our own team. We kind of are working on creating some of those things in-house itself. So that's one major thing that has happened. The other thing that has happened here is that subscription has been one of the big driving forces of revenue. So last year it was, I would say it was COVID year. This year it's being even bigger and better. So a lot of AI has been implemented in and around subscriptions, and that's not just with our organization, but with organizations across the media industry. So things like, getting more users down your funnel and improving retention, and use AI to do all of that, give you users a better experience. That's what's happening. And of course, one of the challenges that I see forthcoming is, we are still an ad-led ad primary ecosystem, and ad revenue is going to dry up, is what we all know across the industry. So we are gearing up for that.
Excellent. And Agnes, going back to the new project you're starting on, what's the problem that you're trying to solve there that you've identified?
So it's not necessarily us identifying a problem, but I'd say that the Reuters Institute in Oxford really put the global attention on a problem of news avoidance. 38% is the global average of active news avoidance. In our markets, it's 32-28%, Sweden and Norway. But we're not actually so interested in news avoidance, but we think of it as news outsidership. So we try to think about it as a task for us, the media, to actually change something in the offerings that we have and who we offer things for. So our target group is news outsiders, people we don't reach today. And as you can imagine, that's an impossible target group because it's not one thing, it's not one type of person. But what we do is that we try to scope very specific groups of people who are currently underserved or not met by our brands or products. One example of that is young people living in the outer city, multicultural outer city areas of Stockholm and the wider other Swedish cities, but we focus on Stockholm to begin with. There we know that consumption of news is very low compared to the national average. We know that trust in news organizations like us is very low compared to the global average or national average. It's going up among older people, it's going down among young people. So we know that we want to do something. But rather than us kind of conducting the traditional market research or surveys, we're trying to take a different approach to user research and also to AI projects, if you would. So a thing that we've done this past few months is that we've run a co-creative speculative design process where we employed 10 people from our target group, all 16 to 18-year-olds living in a specific outer city area here in Stockholm. And we brought them in to our organization because we know that we have an acute diversity crisis, because we wanted to hear their perspectives firsthand, not just about the problems that they're experiencing, but also about the ways that they would want us to solve those problems. So we've had a fascinating 10 weeks of hearing ideas on what news media could be like in the future, coming from the target group that we want to reach. And from an AI journalism perspective, I think what's really exciting about this project is that the ideas that they are coming up with are truly AI optimistic. They are calling for an AI-powered news therapist or speech-to-text commentary, as if that would be the most natural thing ever. And to us, that's really kind of confirming an hypothesis that younger audiences are more likely to accept or even want AI-powered media experiences. So it's been a really interesting learning experience.
It's fascinating you say that, because the last week I've been teaching with my students who are master's students from around the world. And we've been looking at AI technology and journalism, of course, very much in the context of thinking about the future of news, but also precisely the question you raised, which is how do you reach that new generation? Some of them who feel marginalized anyway. And it was really interesting. They were saying the same things that you described. They were saying, wow, well, this AI thing could really help. It could help create ways of formatting journalism and digging out stories that would interest them and that would be relevant to them. So it's really interesting that they seem to agree with the direction of what you're doing as well. Surya, you got this different perspective in that you are sort of using AI to report on AI, on algorithms, aren't you? And you're saying you're expanding into these different geographical areas. How do you think that's going to play out? What's the sort of demand and what's the kind of problems that you think it might be able to address?
Yeah, I think so. The real motivation behind it is, so again, going back to my analogy of the photojournalist, right? It's like we need to be able to witness things where they're happening, and there's a kind of a skew in where the resources are available to do high quality data work, just in terms of where there's money to hire the engineers to build the tools to build one-off kind of investigations. It can be quite expensive, but to meaningfully understand the role tech companies and technology in general is playing on society, you really need to take a holistic global view. It's to me, it's similar to how you can't really understand Nike looking at just the stores in the US. You also have to look at the factories where the shoes are made, right, to understand the full supply chain. And similarly, I think you have to understand the full ecosystem of how discourse is taking place on. It's kind of what both of you are saying. I completely agree with it. I think it is changing because the platforms we're using today to communicate, the way young people are kind of being introduced to public discourse is very different to what we had growing up. Like, I grew up in a world of broadcast, and now they're growing up in a world of multicast, and that's a completely different kind of paradigm. And while I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities, I think there's also room for deceit and kind of like the same kinds of problems you'd expect with anything new. And I think it's important to, in order to get a holistic kind of view on it, you need to be able to see how it affects different cultures and people from different parts of society. And I think that's why you need like a global collaboration. So like, I'm super inspired by groups like ICIJ, Forbidden Stories, folks who've been building these kind of collaborative, again, things that are only enabled thanks to technology and AI. And I'm trying to kind of add to that by building these sort of digital witness tools into the mix.
Yeah. As you say, the tech companies are multinational, indeed they're global. And we're seeing in recent years how that has different effects, though, in different countries, doesn't it? When I think of, the use of WhatsApp in India, for example, around the problems around hate speech and so on. I just wonder what you think that the journalists can actually do with this. Is it that they're trying to hold those platforms to account, or is it that they're trying to do stories about, I don't know, online hate speech? Yes.
Yeah, I think at the base level, it's bearing witness, right? And like bearing witness and precisely articulating on the ground what's happening. So we have precise problems. I think one of the challenges that comes up in this space is there's excellent research that comes out from academia and like people from the field but they talk at a very high level. So like when you hear about hate speech, it's kind of this like overarching term. It leads to like a sense of apathy for the people who are reading about it, because they don't really know how exactly, they have a sense of how they engage with it, but it lacks precision. But if you can build these tools and show like specific anecdotes of, hey, there were these elections happening in this state, and here's are like some 7 concrete examples of how humans use the technology to manipulate the discourse, it kind of puts into context what is being enabled by the technology and what is just kind of waste, fraud, and abuse, which are like very old historical human problems. So I think a big part of this, my role in this, is to try to help build the tools to capture what's happening so we can tell those stories and kind of decouple what is because of the tech and what is just people learning how to use the tech for their own purposes. Yeah.
Abhishek, mentioned India there, and we're really pleased this year that we had lots of Indian journalists taking part, both in the fellowship and the Small Newsroom Academy as well. I just wonder, what's the mood out there in the newsrooms in terms of their enthusiasm for AI and their ability to implement it? Are things shifting over this last 12 months for you?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a embracement of AI as opposed to till last year. People were looking at AI as some sort of a Terminator that's going to take jobs and stuff, right? So now, at least in the newsrooms, people understand, and thanks to programs like this, they understand the value that AI and adoption of AI brings into them. And they know that, look, AI is not going to write an article as good as I do, right? But yes, what they do also understand is that it needs a lot of data, and in order to use these tools, they don't need to be programmers as such. So they are the end users, and I absolutely, I absolutely love the fact, Surya, you touched upon that cost being a very high entry barrier in this market. One of the things that has also come up is the use of tools. So, small tools available to smaller newsrooms and things like, let's say, something like a $10 or $49 or a $99 kind of a price. Or the Indian equivalent is slightly different, but think of it like a bite-sized, adoption that you can do of something that is going to help you at the end of the day. So there are more and more such tools, things like test your headline, do small A/B tests and stuff like that, people are actually sampling those, and definitely a higher adoption of not just the term AI, but the uses of AI as an overall concept.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I've got a cognitive bias that I'm fascinated by journalism and AI, so I suppose I go looking for it. But I do feel there has been a bit of a shift this year in the sense that, as you said, previously people talked about exploring AI, getting to know it. This year, when I go to conferences, when I go on visits, when I talk to people, I'm surprised by how rapidly it's happening. You know, I was in South Africa a few weeks ago at an investigative journalism conference, and it was just stunning, the innovation that's happening there on specific tools, you know, to do stories and to find stories in ways that we just couldn't do a few years ago. So in that sense, I'm quite optimistic. I don't know about you, Agnes, you've been so busy this year. I don't know if you've had a chance to sort of look up from your own work. I just wondered how you felt about progress and whether there was any sort of particular, you know, development or particular project that you've seen this year that you've admired, either editorial or technological.
Lots of different projects, but just I just want to echo what you said on hearing much more concrete examples of this being used, but also probably less mentions of AI, which I think is a very good sign. I went to a data journalism conference in Oslo a few weeks back called Datascoop, and we had all these fascinating data journalism projects that were using very advanced machine learning methods, but they just called it data journalism because it's just another tool in their toolbox, which I think is this point that we've been wanting to get to, that we, at least in some parts of the world or in some newsrooms, are finally at. So that's really great, I think. As for kind of exciting projects in the past year or breakthroughs in the past year, I think it has to be in the realm of generative AI. You can't kind of talk about AI 2022 without thinking about models like DALL-E 2 or most recently the ChatGPT model. These developments are so exciting and so hugely impactful, or at least potentially hugely impactful for our field. And that makes me really excited. And it's happening, the developments are happening with such speed that it's really astonishing to me. But the fact that it is happening quickly kind of reminds me of this mantra that a lot of people were saying in the early days of AI hype, which was that it's not a race, there's no end destination. And I think we really need to keep that in mind now, because it feels like everything's going so quickly and we just want to keep up, that the journey is the goal, so to speak, if I were to speak in taglines. And as we kind of are this journey or do this journey, we need to think about what values we bring into it, rather than kind of rushing to some abstract end place. So definitely exciting with the developments happening, but also a reminder to keep both opportunities and risks top of mind or high on the agenda as we embark or take part of this journey.
Yeah, indeed, things have moved so quickly. Again, we've been playing with the chat GTP bot in classes, and it's extremely exciting. But of course, you can immediately think of misuses of that kind of generative technology, which sort of takes into you, Surya, that in a sense, it's a kind of arms race, isn't it? That the technology is developing very rapidly. And there is both concerns within journalism, how we use this, but also, of course, in society. And I just wondered, do you think we've got the ability as a news media to keep up with this? Are you encouraged by what you've seen this year?
Yeah, certainly. I think Agnes kind of summed it up perfectly, that the journey is the goal. And I think that is true even from the kind of lens that I come from. Like, you know, I spoke to the cohort of JournalismAI fellows earlier this year, and it was really exciting to see how people are thinking of using these tools for their own reporting. I think, you know, like this ChatGPT thing, I think it's super interesting, but I think like it is an arms race. Like first you'll have the thing that writes the text, then you'll have the model that can detect the text was written by a model. Like, you know, like you can just imagine this like endless like cycle of innovation, which is just how it's always gone. What I think is important, though, that is happening now that gives me hope is we're raising the level of digital literacy around our field so that people can tell these stories in a more sophisticated way. What makes me most happy is when I read stories from across the world around the role technology is playing. It doesn't start anymore with I don't use computers, or my kid, there was this trope of how we used to talk about tech literacy 10 years ago. And I think we've all kind of accepted that we have to, it's a part of our, I was watching a movie last night by this director, Steven Soderbergh, who's wrote Ocean's 11, famous Hollywood director. And his movie had a sophisticated take on how content moderation works. And I was really happy to see that, because I was okay, we're finally at the place where we see the kind of societal level shift that's happened because of the role tech plays. And now I feel now that everyone else is coming on board, we'll finally be able to raise the discourse overall around it and kind of ask more nuanced questions. So I'm happy and excited to see that.
Yeah. Abhishek, I wondered, you talked about how people don't mention the sort of scare stories about robots taking jobs, even though they might well be taking a lot of the labor away. Have you seen anything this year in terms of technological development that make you optimistic, excited?
Yeah, definitely. I'm not going to talk about ChatGPT here. I think it's the fastest tool that or AI intervention that reached 1 million users, not just AI, but probably an online tool. That was yesterday. So it's definitely going to be a game changer. But see, India is a very different market than anywhere else. Half of our population is less than 25 years of age, and 65% is less than around 35. So the consumption habits of this audience is very different, and video is one of the things. In fact, short format videos, we are the highest consumption of short format videos. Data is cheap now. India is one of the countries where data is the cheapest, and I think 4G, 3 has spread around. Pretty much everyone has a smartphone these days. Video is one of the things that they consume. So that's the trend that is coming up. And what I see is now video is one of the most expensive thing to produce as a newsroom. One of the trends that I see emerging is the video AI tools getting cheaper. So probably stuff like let's say AI synthetic hosts is what we see, clubbed with some sort of an online video editing tool available to you at a very, very low cost, right? So that's a trend, and I know for sure at least 2 or 3 of the big media houses are planning to go very strong on short news format videos. So on this part of the world, that's one thing that I see emerging. The second thing, of course, I said that there's a cost-sensitive market. So WordPress is one of the most used tools. I also see a big market out there for paid, let's say, small paid AI-driven plugins, keyword generators, or some sort of probably a ChatGPT trained on let's say Hindi articles. I don't know, but coming to you at a very low cost, that's probably a possibility.
It's fascinating talking about this kind of diversity of use cases there. I think that's really interesting, and also the specific contexts of the Indian market or the Indian markets, because there's lots of different places to work there. And I wonder whether you think that that's the future really. It's in the practical different uses that you're going to make of this, rather than some sort of mega piece of kit that's suddenly going to transform everything. Are we at the stage, in other words, where it's a much more practical task? Is that what you think?
I think it has to be practical. It has to be usable, right? It has to be ultimately as we are saying, it's a means to an end, right? So at the end of the day, you can't have a do all AI tool. You can't outsource pretty much everything to AI and sit back relaxed. at the end of the day, people do realize that it's only a tool that is, so data journalism, as Agnes said, right? AI-driven data journalism, at the end of the day, is the same thing, right? So ultimately, as I said, video production or producing articles, it's ultimately content production. So technologies like this would ultimately get you do things faster and get you do the good things even more faster and better.
It's kind of like human beings, right? We need clear delegations and jobs to be done.
Yeah.
That's right. Exactly. You'll be. I think somebody said about the Chat GTP release. Somebody said somewhere that instead of writing, journalists, instead of writing for the public, will be writing for the machines. Now, I don't know if that's entirely true, but there's certainly going to be a lot of more attention needed from the journalists about what the tech is actually doing for them. I wondered, Agnes, sorry, I should say to people, if they're watching or listening, that by all means put some questions into the chat or the Q&A. We've got another 10 minutes, so if you're quick, I can put your questions to the panel. But Agnes, I wanted to sort of go a little bit big picture, which is, I remember, was it now 3 years ago when you did the wonderful project with us looking at bias, how you could use AI to mitigate bias. I wondered how you feel now about that, the kind of ethical trends, if you like. There's a lot of interest in, for example, regulating platforms and networks around the world. And I wondered how you feel now on balance about the direction of travel in terms of the results that we get from using AI technologies in journalism.
Yeah, it's 2 years, 2-year anniversary today, and we just published a blog celebrating. I dropped it in the chat for the hosts, I see now, but you can help me with that. Yeah, it's 2 years ago we did the IO project, and I feel like the topic that we discussed then, which was bias in machine learning systems, definitely has gotten a lot of attention, and you can see in the model documentations of some of these big models that are being released now, both image-based and language-based models, that they're really taking this context or these topics into consideration, which is great. From a newsroom perspective, I think it's really important that we don't forget our responsibility as well, not just put it on the creators of the models that we then use, but also think about how we use these models. We put some concrete advice in terms of generative AI in the blog post. But zooming out more broadly, I think a topic related to AI ethics or responsible AI that really needs urgent action in the coming years is transparency. I think we have this consensus that it's a good thing, that we should be transparent about the ways that we use AI in journalism, but very few newsrooms have actually kind of solved that issue or created practical implementations of telling their users how AI is used, why AI is used. And I think that's really, really important that we manage to kind of get to work on. And again, this goes both for internal and external stakeholders. I personally think that media consumers have a right to be informed whenever AI plays a crucial role in their media experience. But it's also crucial that newsrooms internally know when and how AI is applied across the news value chain. That goes, of course, for technical staff, but also for newsroom leaders, editors. We need different kinds of staff to be able to hold them accountable for the ways that we use AI in journalism. We've had this, again, global consensus on human in the loop being a great idea in AI, and I think it is. But in journalism now, I think we need to get a bit more specific around what human, what kind of person, what role, what function needs to be in the loop. And we actually just published another blog post with this Nordic AI journalism network that I run, and we call for editors in the loop. We think that we really need to get more senior news leaders into the loop on how these systems work.
Yeah, very much so. Abhishek, I want to come to you because I've got a question here from Nicholas Mamo, who's posted a question for us, which I think is interesting because it's kind of big picture in terms of the sort of strategy that newsrooms should adapt. And Nicholas says here, he says, since it's hard to keep up with AI, do you think newsrooms will be forced to specialize in particular areas like news gathering or production? I mean, at the moment, news companies do the whole chain, don't they? But could that change? Or should people try and do everything, try and do it in a more structured, systematic way?
It's an interesting question, because there are two ways to look into this. You're right. The certain organizations would go the whole way of kind of doing the end-to-end content to users and giving them the best experience and the best possible content. But then there could be organizations who actually specialize in a certain aspect. Going back to my previous example, video production is an expensive proposition, right? There are organizations within the country who specialize in video production, whom you could actually hire, and they'll do dedicated content for you, right? Even that goes for data journalism. I mean, you could, there are freelance data journalists who would do stuff exclusively for you, and they would use some of the AI tools to do their work, right? So at the end of the day, yes, using these tools for a specific work or a specific specialization is definitely required. But the other part of the area is, how do you actually give your customers the best possible news content experience? How do you ensure that it's taken care, the bias is taken care of? All the how do you ensure that that's the right news? How do you actually ensure that it's not fake news, right? So when we in an organization like ours, we have 500+ journalists. So it becomes extremely crucial to actually go end to end. But at the end of the day, a certain part of the industry would eventually evolve to use AI for a very specific reason or for a specific purpose. So it'll be a best of both, is what I understand.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I do think we'll see a growth of kind of intermediary companies who can provide services for newsrooms, and they'll adapt their production and even their business model. Surya, I want to come to you with a question we've got. We couldn't go through a discussion like this without mentioning the metaverse at some point. They've got a question here from Radwa Abdulatif. How can newsrooms benefit from the metaverse, and are we going to see media production soon on the metaverse? I'm asking you partly because I'm thinking, you are trying to keep up with the pace of change around networks and so on, and Facebook or Meta have sort of talked about this idea as somehow being transformational. What's your take on that?
My take so far is that we're not there yet. Like, I think so far the numbers are showing us that adoption for the metaverse isn't quite what Facebook was hoping within the first year. They've taken a pretty big hit on their bottom line. They fired more, like 11,000 people this year, which is the first time they've done that. So I think like we're getting there. We're not quite there yet in terms of the role newsrooms play in the metaverse. But I think with all of these things, I think it's very exciting and there's a lot going on. But to me, it's very simple. Like, I think about food a lot, where like technology has transformed food, and like technology can enable like instant pot pressure cooking and amazing slow cooked food, or it can enable fast food like spam and nutritionally bad food that's good for a bottom line of a business. And I think AI and technology and the metaverse, it's the same. It's like, what values are you putting into it come from the people using it? So like what Agnes was saying, I think like is a key point of like, the human in the loop should be an editor, because the role of the editor and knowing what judgment is, what news judgment is, and what is an important story, and how you verify facts. Like people with, like what I'm hopeful for is that we get to a place where you have more role for people with humanities degrees who have a training in critical thinking and logical reasoning that can frame what is coming out of technology to some other kind of field that they have expertise in. And Yeah, so for me, the metaverse question comes down to, it's definitely going to come up. I think we're still a little early in there. And I always like to bring up the example of Facebook pivoting to video, which is when they did this huge push to video, like 10 years ago, 8 years ago at this point, where suddenly, like, at least in the US, it decimated newsrooms because suddenly, like as Abhishek was saying, it's really expensive to produce. They thought everyone wanted video. And it turned out like 3 years later that the metric they were using to measure how many videos of viewing was actually wrong. So they basically were counting anytime someone saw a video to be like that they watched the whole thing. And when they started counting the numbers of how many minutes people were actually spending, it was like seconds, not minutes. And that basically completely changed the industry and the way people were building their business model. So I think to me, it still goes back to this ecosystem and like who is in the room and who has kind of agency in these conversations.
Exactly. That's a great way to bring this discussion to an end. Perhaps next year we should reconvene in the metaverse somewhere and do this all again. I'm incredibly grateful. It's been absolutely fascinating for me, and I hope the audience as well, to hear to your thoughts and to think back how things have changed for all of us in the last year, and I'm sure will change in the future. We've had a fantastic festival with so many great people doing such interesting work, and they've raised so many issues, and you've just pulled it all together in the most wonderfully intelligent, incisive and good-humored way. So I'm incredibly grateful to all of you, and look forward to talking to you over this next year of Journalism and AI.